This is the First Century, a podcast devoted to stories from that influential period of history including Rome, Judea, Christianity, and more. I'm your host, Dr. Brian Schmisek. Get ready to go back in time and enter a world before computers, the stagecoach, the printing press, or even stirrups had been invented for horses. We're about to enter the First Century. Episode 45. Apollos founds the Christian community in Ephesus. Ephesus was a significant city in Asia, replete with a theater that seated about 25,000 people for a population of about 100,000. The city was famous throughout the centuries in antiquity for its temple of Artemis, the goddess whose Roman counterpart was Diana. The temple of Artemis was known as one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, and her temple existed in Ephesus for centuries. An earlier one burned to the ground in 356 BCE, the very night Alexander the Great was born, lending popularity to the belief that Artemis herself was busy attending to Alexander's birth and could not protect her own temple. A new temple was begun around 350 BCE. Pliny speaks of that temple of Artemis in Ephesus, which was standing in the 1st century. He describes it as 425 feet long, 225 feet wide, with 127 columns, each 60 feet high. The architectural complexities in constructing such a temple were so severe that the architect, Chersiphon, is said to have been discouraged when the largest block, the lintel itself, would not settle into place. He even contemplated suicide. But that very night, Artemis appeared to him in a dream and encouraged him to continue, saying that she had laid the stone herself. The next morning, when he went to inspect the status of the work, he saw that the stone seemed to have been adjusted so that the lintel was now level and secure. In the show notes, I'll include a link to the model of this temple of Artemis that stands today near Istanbul. An image of Artemis that fell from the sky was held and worshipped at her temple in Ephesus, and today it's considered to have likely been a meteorite. Artemis, one of the popular deities in ancient Greece, was a virgin, the goddess of the hunt, childbirth, healing, and chastity. She was depicted accompanied by her bow, arrows, and hunting dogs. Homer referred to her as the queen of the wild beasts. In other words, she was a female hunter who served as a midwife while rejecting sexual activity herself. Like many in the Greek pantheon, Artemis's benefits had shadow sides. For a woman in childbirth, Artemis could ease the mother's pain to the point of taking it away altogether. But she could just as easily cause her painless death in a merciful act of euthanasia. Artemis was a twin sister of Apollo and daughter of Zeus and Leto. There was a belief that both Artemis and Apollo were born in the nearby grove at Ortygia, about 5 miles south of the city center of Ephesus. Artemis protected Ephesus, and worship of Artemis consisted of dances wearing crowns of myrtle. Not only was there a keeper of the temple, a person who held that office, but the entire city of Ephesus could be said to be a keeper of the temple and recipient of the privileges that accompanied that status. The Ephesians were proud of Artemis. She was their goddess, and she protected them, as Ephesus was her city and had been for centuries. Mark Antony himself had been to Ephesus many times, and the city saw both Mark Antony and Cleopatra visit in 33 BCE when they used it as a base for their 800 ships immediately prior to the Battle of Actium. We recall that Augustus's general Marcus Agrippa defeated Mark Antony and Cleopatra, and in 27 BCE, when he became princeps, Augustus moved the capital of the province of Asia from Pergamum to Ephesus. Most recently, Agrippina and her husband Passienus were there when Passienus served as proconsul of Asia in about 43. All of this is to say, Ephesus seemed ripe for Christian missionaries, one of whom was Apollos. Apollos was a Jew from Alexandria, and he had heard not only about Jesus, but also about John and his baptism for the forgiveness of sins. Apollos was now in Ephesus at the synagogue, and he met some other Jews who were there, and they were also aware of John's baptism. Apollos was an eloquent speaker, well versed in the scriptures, and like many educated Jews in Alexandria, including Philo, he had learned to read the sacred texts in an allegorical way. That is, they treated the stories as symbolic expressions of deeper philosophical and spiritual truths about humanity, God, and the moral life, not merely as literal historical accounts. So in his allegorical way of reading Scripture, Apollos saw that Jesus was the fulfillment of these texts. Apollos was so instrumental in making this case in Ephesus that many people from the synagogue came to accept his interpretations, namely, that Christ was to be identified with pre-existent wisdom, and that Jesus himself was the Christ. For example, in Sirach 24, divine wisdom comes forth from God, dwells among God's people, reveals God's covenant, and nourishes Israel. Apollos read Sirach 24 as a preparation for the mystery of the Incarnation. What wisdom symbolically was for Israel, Jesus Christ is personally and fully the incarnate wisdom of God dwelling among humanity. In like manner, in the book of Scriptures known as the Wisdom of Solomon, wisdom is said to be eternally with God, participating in creation, reflecting God's glory, descending from heaven, revealing God, guiding Israel, and saving God's people. So Apollos read the Wisdom of Solomon as a profound preparation for this incarnation. What wisdom is described as being and doing in this book, Apollos said Jesus accomplished personally. For Apollos, the Wisdom of Solomon represents wisdom almost as a divine person who proceeds from God, shares God's glory, and enters history for humanity's salvation. Apollos recognized a prophetic anticipation of Jesus Christ, who is not merely wise, but is wisdom itself incarnate, the eternal wisdom of God. Apollos also became friendly with about a dozen others in Ephesus, including Hymenaios, Philetos, and Alexander. They had all experienced John's baptism and had even followed John for a time. They and other pilgrims who had journeyed to Jerusalem for various festivals had been baptized by John in the Jordan before returning to Ephesus. So they were eager to hear Apollos, and it was from him that they learned about Jesus for the first time, and that he could be interpreted as pre-existent wisdom. Next time, we'll turn our attention back to Rome.